as people just begin to come to terms with the floods that have devastated the area. One person has died and another is feared dead. Thousands have been evacuated from their homes. Our first report tonight comes from Northampton, where emergency services have been fighting some of the worst floods in the town's history. Carl Heidel reports.
Northampton is in a state of alert. The worst storms in living memory. Residents from St James being taken to safety. Many of them have lost everything as their houses and flats are deluged in water, in some places up to the windows.
Just got up, of course couldn't move, everywhere was flooded. Just done what they told us, opened the front and back door, because the current was going to get stronger.
I've lived in this area all my life, but I can't remember anything like this.
It's frightening, it's not very nice at all.
People from all over Northampton have pulled together to help those in distress, with some rescues taking place in a novel way.
We've got 15 to 20 streets that are underwater, up to 6 to 8 feet deep in places. Since about 4 o'clock this morning, we've been concentrating on the medical emergencies, asthmatics, diabetics, people with heart complaints and so on. And we're currently starting to move out the non-priority people. Now, having said that, that water is extremely cold and there are a lot of people that potentially could suffer from hypothermia, so we're getting people out as quickly as we can, but this will be a long operation.
In South Northampton, the River Nen has burst its banks. Here, police are vainly searching for a 33-year-old woman who was washed overboard from a houseboat. Officers still haven't found her body.
It all began yesterday afternoon when we received a report of a lady who'd possibly fallen off a houseboat by South Bridge. I'm very sorry to say that that lady is still missing and the situation is looking very bleak in respect of her.
Today, though, there's been a fatality. An elderly lady was found in her flooded flat in St James. It's understood she either drowned or died from hypothermia.
The area around Milton Keynes was also badly hit, with a month's worth of rain falling in a single night across Buckinghamshire. A group of anglers almost drowned as they were swept away by the floods. Charlotte Fisher reports.
7 fishermen and 2 children almost drowned in the early hours of the morning. They were among 17 anglers fishing overnight at Linford Lakes near Milton Keynes.
A wall of water came down the river about 3 to 4 foot high. That just swept all the fishermen and all their equipment straight off the side of the lake. Them 7 guys and the 2 children could have died. One minute they were in sort of soft, mushy ground, and the next minute they was up to their chests in water.
Water levels rose within minutes and the land was submerged under 4 feet of water. One man got separated from his friends. A Sea King helicopter was already in the area and was called in amid fears that the fishermen had been swept away. All the anglers managed to clamber to safety. No one was seriously injured, though a 10-year-old boy is said to be extremely traumatized by his ordeal. Between them, the fishermen say they've lost around £15,000 worth of equipment.
Finally tonight to Cambridgeshire, where the situation has been much the same. Most of the houses in Alconbury near Huntingdon were cut off or flooded by the rain, and it took several hours to rescue families. It was a similar picture in nearby Alconbury Weston. The White Hart pub was just one place that was underwater. There are worries that further flooding is likely over the next few days. The Environment Agency has issued a red flood alert in Cambridgeshire, and people in low-lying areas are being warned to protect their homes. And of course we're going to keep you fully up to date on the flooding situation in our bulletins over the weekend, the first of which is tomorrow at 1:05. From all of us here, very good night.
Line is blocked. Passengers are being diverted. Elsewhere, the flood levels in Shakespeare's Stratford haven't been this bad for over 30 years. The Avon is no longer contained within its banks. And at the Royal Shakespeare Theatre, the weather has caused them another headache.
The theatre's flooded and we've had to cancel tonight's performance of the rather aptly named Merchant of Venice.
In Northamptonshire, the emergency services evacuated people from their homes using boats. One couple were able to save their wedding clothes.
We're getting married tomorrow at St James Church. Here's our suits.
What happens next will depend on the rain. The weather forecast for the next 24 hours could hamper efforts to get people back in their homes.
And in America, 32 people were killed when a tornado and storms hit Alabama. Another 5 died in Georgia. US Vice President Al Gore has been visiting some of the survivors, many of whom are now homeless. A massive clean-up operation is underway to provide emergency food and shelter to those affected. Meteorologists classified the tornado which hit the area near Birmingham, Alabama as an F5 twister, the highest classification of tornado category. Pop star George Michael, who was arrested for what Los Angeles police described as a lewd act in a public lavatory, has appeared live on television to give his side of the story. A few minutes ago, he told CNN he was not ashamed of what he'd done.
I have no problem with people knowing that I'm in a relationship with a man right now. I have not been in a relationship with a woman for almost 10 years. I do want people to know that the songs that I wrote when I was with women were really about women, and the songs that I've written since have been fairly obviously about men. So I think in terms of my work, I've never been reticent in terms of defining my sexuality. I write about my life, and I want people to know, especially people who loved the earlier stuff, especially if they were young girls at the time, whatever, there was no bull there, you know.
George, why do you feel compelled to open up a very private part of your life and make it so public?
Well, I feel because I've kind of done that, haven't I? You know, I've done that in a way that I didn't really intend to. And I think having done something as stupid as that, you know, I'm a very proud man. I want people to know that I have not been exposed as a gay man in any way that I feel, I don't feel any shame for. I feel stupid and I feel reckless and weak for having allowed my sexuality to be exposed this way, but I don't feel any shame whatsoever, and neither do I think I should.
I appreciate your candor and thank you for coming here.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Football now, and Arsenal, who play Newcastle at...
The body of a woman believed drowned was found in her home, and fears are increasing for the safety of another thought to have fallen from her narrow boat on the River Nene. At first light, rescuers will resume their search for a 14-year-old boy who was swept from a van along this flooded road.
There are hopes for finding him, but because it's so long since he went into the river, we've got to balance that against the possibility of him not being found alive.
The freak weather's played havoc with Easter travel plans. Drivers have been stranded for hours. Some West Coast ferry services are disrupted, and some rail journeys are virtually impossible. Red alerts remain on a number of rivers, and with forecasters anticipating more rain and possibly snow, further bank holiday misery seems inevitable. Havovi Todd, GMTV News.
The comedian Rick Mayall is in intensive care this morning with head injuries after a motorcycle accident. He was taken by police helicopter to a hospital in Plymouth after his quad bike overturned on his farm in Devon. Doctors say he's in a comfortable condition. George Michael's agreed to a tell-all television interview in the United States after being charged with performing a lewd act. The superstar will talk to NBC within the next few days after pulling out of a scheduled interview last night. He's expected to appear before an LA court next month. Football and Manchester United have suffered a blow in their hopes of landing their 5th Premier League.
All the way from RAF Wattisham in Suffolk, the only emergency vehicle able to offer assistance and winch the man to safety. Back in Northampton earlier this morning, people having breakfast at one of the rescue centres. They bedded down overnight at the Church of the Latter-day Saints, trying to come to terms with their living nightmare. You've got no insurance?
None at all whatsoever. Of household or nothing, no. It's bad. Really, really bad.
Meanwhile, back at the flood sites, much of the water has disappeared. The debris and boats left at the roadside are a reminder of the devastation caused and the extent of the floods. Residents along St Leonard's Road in Far Cotton, where water was many feet deep, are facing their nightmare as best they can.
The clear-up operation is underway, but nobody's seen anything like this before. This carpet is totally sodden. Look here at my boots, you can see the water squelching out from underneath them. The television is ruined, and the flood water came in so high that it lifted up this heavy piece of furniture and turned it on its side, and the fridge there is almost upside down.
More than 1,500 homes have been affected in Northampton alone, and around the whole of the region there are thousands more. Carl Heidel, Anglia News, Northampton.
The Environment Agency has issued red flood warnings for the River Nene in Cambridgeshire and the River Ouse in Bedfordshire. It says the worst could still be to come. Staff at the region's emergency flood control centre warn that after yesterday's major flooding, Peterborough and Bedford are likely to be hit tonight.
They should be aware of the likelihood of very heavy flows, and that could lead to flooding in their areas, and they need to be very alive to that and be taking action to protect their own properties and their own families from the effects of water, if indeed they're unfortunate enough to become subject to it.
Finally, do you remember the couple we spoke to yesterday in Northampton who'd managed to salvage their wedding clothes as their house flooded? Well, Sarah Tew and Darren Hillier are pressing ahead with their wedding this afternoon, despite the floods. We'll be there and hope to bring you a report in our afternoon bulletin just after 4:05. Join us then if you can.
The worst of the rain may have passed, but the floodwaters at their highest level for a generation are not yet subsiding. Hundreds have had to abandon their homes after a month's rain in 24 hours. It could take days before the cleanup is completed. In Warwickshire, police confirmed they'd recovered the body of 14-year-old Carl Giles. He was washed away in the floods. He was due to have gone on a family holiday today. In Northampton, they're still searching for a 33-year-old woman who was swept from the narrowboat in which she lived.
We're calculating that it's certainly around a 1 in 150-year flood event that we've had in the last couple of days.
What you see is a result of the River Avon bursting its bank. That's Stratford Racecourse. The centre of the town itself is mostly underwater. There has been a break in the weather, but with all the rain overnight, it's unlikely that the floodwaters will recede just yet. Once again, the show will not go on at the Royal Shakespeare Theatre. The Tempest is cancelled. All across the Midlands, this has been a bank holiday disaster. People have rallied to help where they can, using whatever means at hand. There was some good news. Sarah Tew and Darren Hillier were married after rescuing their wedding clothes from the floods yesterday. But while they fly off for their honeymoon, others brace themselves for what may come next. Several more rivers are on flood alert. Hundreds have no electricity. The misery and upheaval is not over yet by a long shot. Eric McInnes, ITN in the Midlands.
And in Australia, Sydney and Brisbane have also been reeling under floods. In Sydney, more rain has fallen in the past 3 days than normally falls during the whole month. Most of the city's major roads are impassable, with the rains leaving hundreds of Easter holiday motorists stranded. Dozens of homes have been damaged and at least one shopping centre and a church are underwater. In Brisbane, 3 people from the same family were electrocuted during the storm. The mother was carrying her son when she stepped onto a fallen power line. Her husband died when he tried to rescue them. At least 11 people have been killed and 10 seriously injured in a powerful earthquake which struck northeastern Iran. The quake, measuring 5.9 on the Richter scale, was centred on the village of Birjand. Tehran radio said 6 aftershocks followed the earthquake. More than 1,500 people have been made homeless. Roads have now been cleared for aid trucks to bring in food and blankets for survivors who have slept in near freezing temperatures overnight. Relief workers have been working frantically to erect makeshift tent compounds for them. Now for
ever launched could be built in Scotland. Costing around £6 billion and 1 mile long, it would be a tax haven for the super rich. It's reported that the massive ship would never dock, just roam the seas in international waters following the sun. While the super ship may be a marine architect's dream, today's largest passenger liner has just been launched and it's heading for the south coast. This from Ian Ramage.
P&O's Grand Princess left the dockyard in Monfalcone on the Italian coast heading for Southampton. The state-of-the-art supership is the largest liner built and would dwarf even the Titanic. Weighing over 100,000 tons, she can carry 3,000 passengers and a crew of over 1,000. She cost £250 million to build. As well as 5 swimming pools, she boasts a 9-hole golf course, as well as covered tennis courts and 2 theatres. But if the Grand Princess is big, she's only a shadow of what's planned. The superliner that's in the pipeline would be 5 times longer, and you'd be able to build over 20 Grand Princesses for the cost of 1 floating tax haven. Ian Ramage, ITN.
And that's all from the ITN Morning News team. GMTV follows us. Next news from ITN is at one of the...
It's emotionally a roller coaster with just some of the most horrific victims coming in, burnt orangutans, burnt to death, and dying babies, and the sheer numbers.
Borneo's forests are being laid waste on a scale never before seen in this part of the world. For the second year running, fires are still being started deliberately to clear land. But in this year's exceptionally dry weather, they've spread even further and into the thick forests, which are the orangutan's natural habitat. This tiny orphan is being given oxygen to try to clear out his smoke-filled lungs. But his carers don't expect him to survive more than a few days. All they can do is to try to provide a little comfort.
Even for those orangutans who've been saved from the fires, the future's bleak. The fact is that by the time they come to be rehabilitated, they may find their former forest homes look rather like this. The demand for land here is so high, both from the big timber companies and from ordinary people, that there's scarcely any room left for the animals.
If the destruction of Borneo continues at its present rate, within a few decades the world will have lost some of its most precious wildlife species forever. So far, the plight of the orangutans has failed to produce any action from the government here that might save them. Jonathan Head, BBC News, Indonesian Borneo.